computer. Okay, now we're recording, talking about contracts. Excellent question. All right, so I've got the contract up here. We've got two contracts. Now, actually, guys, here's a trick question. I told you it's a trick, right? How many residential contracts do we really have now in Florida? Anybody?
One.
No.
Two.
What's your question?
How many different types of contracts to purchase a home do we have? Anybody?
Are there three?
Residential.
There's three. Yes. Mute.
I'm
Mute. Okay. So what it is, you have the as is and the FAR bar, right? These say on the bottom, Florida Realtors, Florida Bar. These two contracts were created by the Florida Bar. Then you have the CRISP. The CRISP contract is created by another legal team. Also included, if you go into .loop and you go into templates, you would find, if you go under Florida Interactive Forms and you look for contracts under here, you will find a contract, which is on the very bottom. It says CRISP. Okay. I don't ever want you guys to use those. You remember, the way to see who created this contract is you go to the very bottom and it'll tell you here, like this is the Florida Bar, right? The other legal group is called CRISP, CRSP. The problem is that we have addendums that were created for the Florida Bar, by the Florida Bar for these contracts, and we have addendums that were created by the CRISP team for the CRISP contract. And all the time I'm seeing people using the addendums that'll say CRISP with the FAR bar contract. Guess what? Conflict. So a lot of times I have had attorney, like for example, if you use the wrong FHA VA addendum, and we're just gonna look at this really quickly. Any of you who maybe have seen me do this before, it's worth seeing it again. So here we are under Florida Interactive Forms. If I say FHA, two come up, right? And you'll notice if I hover over them, this one says FAR bar. If I hover over this one, well, actually you can see it right there, CRSP, CRISP. So I have on many occasions, two people in my waiting room. How do I find my waiting room? Hold on, let me see my waiting room. Middle. So I have seen many times this particular FHA VA addendum. It's a one page added to the regular FAR bar contract, and the lenders kick it back because it conflicts with our actual contract. So in some cases they don't conflict, in other cases they do, but they never match it properly because it's different language. So even though it's a contract, it doesn't mean it's the same. Just to give you an overview, if you ever get a CRISP, I have seen a couple. If you ever have a CRISP contract, it's more closer to the residential contract than the as is, but it is not the same. So don't think with the inspection period and all of those things that it's exactly the same, because it's not. So if you get a CRISP and your seller wants to accept it, before you do, talk to me. Let's go over the differences that you're not aware of, because they could catch you in a very ugly spot. We have seen that happen. Everybody good on that? Okay, so what we're going to talk about to start is the difference between this as is, which God help me, you know how I feel about it, or the residential contract. Now, who can tell me when we started with the as is? Anybody know?
The crash.
After the crash. The as is was never used prior to the real estate crash at all. I hate saying the crash, right? But it is what it is. The bump, the blip. So anyway, it was not used. And what happened was banks came up with this, right? Because banks had all these properties. Are they in the business of selling homes? No, they're in the business of financing homes, but certainly not selling homes. So they were just like, take it. I don't care anything about it. You are buying this thing as is. Whatever's wrong with it is wrong with it. You get it. I'm washing my hands. That's where this as is contract came from. That's why they came up with this contract. It is as close to a bank contract as you can see. Now, even if you use an as-is contract, the bank is still going to have an addendum that's basically going to say everything we say goes, and we're washing our hands of it, right? It's going to be totally in their favor. But that's what happened with an as-is contract. So there are people, and I've heard attorneys tell agents they should always be using as is because they're super simple. But is simple always good? Not in my opinion, right? It doesn't address so many things. People think you're protecting your customers using an as is. Who are you protecting? Anybody? Who was that? That was weird. Okay. Felt like I heard someone answering, but I didn't hear that. Okay. Does anybody think that the as is contract protects a certain type of client or customer? We don't say client.
Buyer.
Protects the seller. I love that, Jules. I'm so glad you're here today. And Dexter thinks it protects the buyer. So this is why we're talking about this today. An as-is contract, let's look at this really quickly. We're going to go back and break down a contract, but I want us to just look at, we're going to go through first page. We're looking at the second page. We're looking at the third page, right? It is not, and let's go into the residential contract. We've got the first page. Then we got the second page and we got the third page. It's this third page where it changes. It is exactly the same until this third page. Okay. Then as you move on in the as-is residential contract, all of the disclosures are the same. Special assessments, the same. Radon, permits, mold, flood, the same, guys. Energy brochure, guys. Are we supposed to send that to our customers to get signed? Yeah, we are, because it says right here, buyer acknowledges receipt of the energy brochure, right? People don't realize that. That is exactly what this says. FERPTA, the exact same, seller's disclosure. Where it starts to change is right here. Property inspection and repair. Morning, come grab a contract. Two of them. As is and residential. So that is where the contracts change. So let us look at the language, and then we're going to go back and break into the contract a little bit more, but I really want us to delve into today a little bit more as to the difference between the two, okay? So as we go over here, and we get over here to special assessments, the same as we just saw, radon, gas, permits, we talked about all this, exactly the same, right? We get over here to property inspection. Oh, but this also says right to cancel. Did you see that one in the residential contract? No. Property inspection and repair. The reason is because the residential contract before the crash in real estate, when realtors put together a buyer and a seller, did we think that the buyer was going to back out? Did we want to get the buyer in a contract so they could back out? Right? We wanted them in the contract because they wanted to buy a home. We wanted to make sure they understood they could have this property inspected. And if anything came back wrong with it, we can talk about that. Either the seller can pay for it, they can pay for it, they can split it, or they could get out of the contract and get their money back. But we wanted them to know this is part of the process, right? You buy a home, you get an inspection. Something comes back wrong, we talk about it. We decide what we're going to do and we move forward, right? We have a financing contingency. They both have that, okay? But the difference here is because of what the banks were doing, this is the language they've added. Inspection period, buyer shall have, now if left days after, who's that? Okay, within which the buyer may, at buyer's expense, conduct a general, a WDO, and permit inspections, right? So they can or they cannot, right? Do they have to have them? Mm-mm. Do they have to have it done by a licensed inspector? No. No, they don't. If buyer fails to timely deliver to seller written notice of the report required below, then let's go over here. Sorry, I'm in as is. Buyer shall have, you'll see, if left blank, 15 days within which to have such inspections of the property performed as the buyer shall desire. Right? If they want the WDO, they can have it. If they don't, do they have to have it? No. Right? Okay. If the buyer, here's the language, determines in the buyer's sole discretion. This is right out of the vacant land contract, guys. In the buyer's sole discretion that the property is not acceptable to the buyer may terminate this contract by delivering written notice of such election prior to the expiration of the inspection period. Does it say they have to have it inspected by an inspector? No. Do they say they have to give you the inspection report? No. Could it be by the neighbor? Sure. Could they just wake up and say the sky's blue, I don't feel like buying a home? Yeah. This is not an inspection clause. This is a cancel for any reason clause. That's all this is. So if I'm a seller and I'm going to take my home off the market, say for up to 15 days, and then Tammy is buying my house. She wakes up and she says, it's kind of a cloudy day and I really don't feel like moving to Windermere anymore. So I'm canceling. It's day 14. She sends me notice. What happens? She gets her money back and I have to start all over again. Not only do I have to start all over again, so as a seller, in my seller's mindset, how do I feel about this? How do I feel about my realtor who put me in this position? Because we know it's always our fault, right? And let me ask you this. How do I feel about missing 14 days of activity on that market, especially right now? I don't like it. I don't like it. Okay, let's continue with that thought. This is how this contract is used. Tammy just says, yeah, I don't feel like buying the house, but really don't like any of the tile. And oh, there's a lot of problems with caulking. And, you know, the backyard is kind of messy. So if you don't give me $15,000 as a credit off the price, whatever she wants, I'm backing out. That's more what we're hearing, isn't it? Or my favorite, the bogus email from the realtor who's acting like they're an inspector. This one's the fun one. And they give you a bogus list of all these repairs that need to be done, right? Okay, that are ridiculous. And then they give their own pricing on it. That's going to cost $10,000. Meanwhile, it probably costs about $1,500, right? But what are they doing? They're holding the seller a ransom. They're going to say, either I'm going to continue, but you got to give me 15,000. This is the carrot. If you don't do it, I'm backing out and I'm getting my money back. And what do you have? You have a desperate seller sometimes who just doesn't want to go into the process of selling their home again, right? They're like, thank God, no more showings, right? Thank God, I don't have to keep this thing up to be shown. You're back there going, heck, I know. I have to do that with my house all the time. It's awful being a seller, right? I mean, how many of you sold your home recently? It's terrible, right? So you got to understand, people are using this contract not as it's intended. The bank intended to say, I don't care what you want, 10,000, 15,000. You want the house or you don't. That's how it's coming. But realtors don't present the contract in the way this is intended. That's how it's intended. If you're representing the buyer and you're doing an as-is contract, you are supposed to be telling the buyer, Jules, they're requesting that we send this as a contract as is, meaning you're buying the home as is. Don't worry, you can have an inspection. And if you don't like anything, you can cancel and get your money back. But you can't really ask for anything because they're telling you not doing anything. You're buying the home as is. Right? That's how we're supposed to be setting up the mindset of our buyers. Let's talk about what really happens, right? Let's go through the real scenario. Jules, we're buying this home as is, but actually, no. Let's take a step back. That doesn't even happen. They never even say that. Jules, don't worry. We're going to buy this home. We're going to come in at a high price. Then we're going to ask for all sorts of repairs and we're going to change the price of the home, right? Because we're going to renegotiate the contract in the middle of the thing. How's that sound? Fabulous. That's what happens. Okay, that's how realtors use this contract. Let's be honest. Here's a quick story. Come to find out, by the way, this was not a realtor we were dealing with. It was a broker who had 8 agents underneath her. This agent puts in a contract on a home where we clearly stated in seller remarks that the seller is requesting a residential contract. All offers are to be made on a residential contract. She sends it in on an as-is. Surprise, happens all the time. And we counter, we say, I'm sorry, the seller has requested the contract on a residential. So if you would like me to present this to the seller, it must be on a residential contract. So they submitted it on a residential. Okay, we accept the offer. Let's say it was a 15-day inspection, I don't remember. Say we're in day 7. And the buyer, and this is the best part, the broker puts in writing, the buyer doesn't want to buy the home anymore. Has nothing to do with financing or anything, just has changed her mind. Actually wrote those words, maybe a little more eloquently, but not much, okay? So then sends the release and cancellation with the buyer getting their money back. So we say, well, certainly you can cancel, but clearly you understand the buyer's not getting their money back. The deposit's the seller's. And then she said, well, what do you mean? We're within our Inspection period. Yes, you are. And the inspection period says you have a right to get an inspection. And you know what else it says? Let's look over here in a regular residential contract. On the regular residential contract, where this contract changes, it also says ahead of time how much the seller will be willing to pay for general repairs, for WDO, for permit, anything dealing with open permits, right? Or anything having to do with permits that were never obtained. So it doesn't say you can cancel for any reason. It says that you can have an inspection. You have to produce us the report, the summary report. If we ask for it, which we do, please send the inspector's report over. They have to send the summary page over, not the whole inspection. Because their little email that says all the things that need to be done is not sufficient. I want to see what the inspector wrote. Because in the residential contract, it must say some very specific words. When we get over to the part here, they must say, must repair or replace. How many inspection reports do you see says, talk to the seller, more information needed? Like bogus, retarded things. You know, it could be a problem.
Professional.
Yeah, get a professional to look at it. Right, exactly. Recommend further investigation.
The roofer.
None of those words matter. Their
Carrie,
report, yes.
what if they request a full report?
Well, you don't have to give it to them. All you need to give them is a summary page.
Okay.
Yep.
Say that again out of years. Question.
Dexter had asked, what if they request a full report? You don't have to give it to them. They didn't pay for the report. I mean,
Yeah.
your buyers who paid share that report, they can, but that is not what it says here. It says that when we put in writing that we would like a copy, we are getting the summary report, right, of what's wrong. And that's where it'll say must repair or replace or some bogus thing that does not matter. So in this instance, it had all sorts of bogus things. Check the caulking, check the this, check the that. I want to look at something really quickly. Can we? This is my favorite part. And if we go through financing and all that first, we miss this. This is the strongest part of the entire residential contract. So to your point, Dexter, so it starts here. I'm on the residential contract line 274 or 273. Buyer shall, within the inspection period, inform the seller of any general repair items that are not in the condition required by delivering the seller written notice. Upon written request by seller, a copy of the portion of the professional inspector's written report dealing with such items. So notice it doesn't say the whole thing. And then it says, this is the best part, guys. The following items shall be free of leaks, water damage, and structural damage. Obviously, we shouldn't have any leaks or structural damage in the ceiling, the roof, the exterior, the interior walls, doors, windows, and foundations. Guys, the home has got to work, right? You can't have a big gaping hole in it. It's got to work. Now, together with the pool equipment, any non-leased major appliances, heating, cooling, mechanical, electrical, security, sprinkler, septic, and plumbing systems. We don't have to really typically worry about seawalls or dockage. But they shall be maintained until closing in, what does it say? Does it say perfect? Does it say new? It says working condition. This is the power of this contract. Torn screens, fogged windows, and missing roof tiles or shingles shall be what? Repaired or replaced by the seller prior to closing. Because remember, if a screen is supposed to keep a bug out and it's torn, bugs can get in. So it's not in working condition. Does that make sense, right? If there's a roof tile missing, right? A shingle missing, that roof is now compromised. You have to fix that. So now it can be secured. Does that make sense? Okay, but there's where we get interesting. This is where it gets fun. Seller is not, did I say not required to repair or replace cosmetic conditions. This is the best part right here. What is a cosmetic condition, guys?
Chip paint,
Yeah, so working condition means that the thing must be operating in the manner in which the item was designated to operate. Cosmetic conditions means aesthetic imperfections that do not affect the working condition. Now, here's the best part. Here's some of the things, but not limited to: pitted marcite, tears, worn spots, and discoloration of floor coverings, wallpapers, window treatments. God, if I hear this one again, nail holes, scrapes, scratches, dents, chips, or caulking. God, that caulking. Every inspector sends pictures of caulking, right? It's like ridiculous. Caulking in the ceilings, the walls, the flooring, the tile, the fixtures, or the mirrors. Minor cracks in the walls, the floor tile. Oh my God, there's a crack in the floor tile. It needs to be replaced. It must be structural damage. No, we live in Florida. We are on sand and water's very close. It is called foundational movement. It's normal. It breathes and tiles crack. So no, it doesn't affect the working condition. Also, cracks in windows, driveways. Driveways are cracked all the time, right? Sidewalks, pool decks, garage. Oh, you always hear about that garage. Must be structural damage. By the way, go back and read a builder contract. That crack must be larger than 1/8 of an inch. Guys, you know how big 1/8 of an inch is? It's pretty big. That's the only thing they would even start to consider any problems. These things are over 1/8 of an inch, right? Okay. Cracked, this is the best. Ready? Cracked roof tiles, cracked, not missing, but cracked, curling or worn shingles, or limited roof life shall not be considered defects that the seller must repair or replace, as long as there's no evidence of leaks, leakage, or structural damage. Yeah. Thank you, Jules. Woo! I got one. She said, why am I using the as is? You know how many times the inspector comes back and says there's limited roof life, and now the buyer asks for $10,000, $12,000 for a new roof, and then the seller's like, oh my gosh, well, of course I'm never going to be able to sell this. It has limited roof life. Who cares? That's why you use a residential contract. Mic drop.
One thought.
Yeah.
What do you think about this? So when we're in such a competitive market right now, going after property, if you do know the difference between these contracts and you are the seller's agent, you might be inclined, because now your seller's going to be obligated to make repairs. They may not have one. I guess you can limit the amount.
Thank you. So Tammy's saying in such a competitive market, you know, she's concerned about the sellers not wanting to make repairs. Well, there's two things here. First off, guys, you should be explaining to the seller. Here in the state of Florida, typically we use two different contracts, a residential and an as-is. And you can choose, not the realtor, guys, the seller is supposed to choose which contract they feel more comfortable. So you would say the as-is contract means you're selling the home as is, which sellers might be like, yeah, that's what I want. But that means that you have an inspection period where they can get inspections done or not. They can have their brother look at it, their uncle look at it, their mother look at it, and they can determine in their sole discretion if they feel your home is okay, right? And if they don't want to, you're pulling your home off the market for maybe up to 7, 10, 15 days, and they can get their money back and decide they don't want to buy it. Or you can go into a residential contract where you determine ahead how much you are willing to give. So if you're saying, I don't want to do much, you can say, well, listen, I'm willing to do $500. I'm willing to do $0. You don't have to leave it. You can put whatever amount they feel comfortable. What you are doing is limiting their exposure. Now, I wouldn't say 0. I would give it a little something, because if there's a little something, why let the buyer out, right? But you can say, I'm willing to do $500 for general repairs. I'm willing to do $400 for WDO and $200 for open permits. And so if that report comes back and everything on it is cosmetic, can that buyer get out?
No.
Sure they can, but you're keeping their money. That's the beauty. A buyer can always be in default. They can always cancel, but they're going to lose their deposit. Yes, Emily.
I have a question. So say they come back with stuff that's on here that says that you should cover, like say every single window is clouded. So then are they gonna
it says repair or replace. So if there's a real problem where the windows aren't working, you know, if something is fogging up and really not working, there's probably a major issue in that house, not to mention mold and God knows what else came up from that, right? So what you're doing is, let's say that cost to repair it is $2,500. Let's just throw that number out. And you said, I'm going to go up to $500. Now They get estimates done. They say, this thing's going to cost 2,500. Now we're in conversation.
Okay,
The
so-
seller could say, listen, I'm only willing to pay 500. The buyer could say, okay, I'll move forward. I'll pay the other 2,000. The seller could say, I'll pay the whole thing. They move forward. Okay. Or they can say, hey, let's just split it. Okay. Or maybe they can't come to terms. Then they cancel and the buyer gets their money back. But they had the opportunity to have that discussion, right? It's not do this or I'm canceling. It's this is what the repair will cost. Now you're having a true conversation with your seller saying, listen, if they're finding that there's, cracked windows for whatever reason, or whatever that case is, the next person's going to find that too. Right? Let's be honest. Yeah.
I think I'm just, maybe I'm looking too deep into this, but I'm just wondering if, like, say something that would be considered property condition, like, ends up costing more than that amount that they put in there. Does it negate that amount because it's
No.
supposed to be property condition?
It doesn't negate the amount. She's asking if whatever they found that was required to be cared for came up to cost a lot more. Let's say they find polybutylene piping.
Yeah.
That's a mess. Okay, guys, that's a mess. It's going to cost at least $2,500 if you're lucky. Probably more now, depending on the size of the house, right? So let's say it's polybutylene piping, and they said they were only willing to do $500 to general repair. The seller's not obligated to do more than $500, but the buyer can cancel and get their money back.
So last time I'm gonna ask. So say it's considered property condition. I just don't want the buyer to come back on here and be like, this says that you're supposed to keep this free and clear of these things based on property condition, and you need to do that and the 5,000 you said you did for general repairs.
Listen, property condition means the house has to be functioning. So yeah, if that air conditioning goes during that time, they do have to fix it.
Okay.
And they have to in the as-is as well.
Yeah.
Because the maintenance portion of the as-is contract is exactly the same as the maintenance portion of the residential contract. So keeping the house maintained doesn't matter what contract you're in. It's the same in both. It's just when they find inspection issues. But what's great about that is, guys, how many times do we get that laundry list of items that are all cosmetic?
Yeah.
Every time. So here's a story to finish off. She sends back the inspection report because we requested it. And the seller said, the inspector said, have a further conversation with the seller about, check it. I mean, there was nothing. It was clean. It was about fix a knob or some stupid things, right? $500. So do we need to do an addendum? No, we don't, because we've already agreed to $500. And as long as the repairs don't come beyond the $500, we're covered. So they kept trying to get out. So this lady actually circles in her buyer, and her buyer emails us. How professional is this? A broker. She emails us and she says, well, I want to cancel because I had the inspection, so now I can cancel. That's how she's explained this contract. Well, all you need to do is have an inspection and you can get out. And we said, well, that's great. You have the inspection. What's wrong with the home? And then they try to give us the laundry list. They finally gave us the inspection. She says, but I just want to get out and get my money back. Well, I'm sorry. There's nothing wrong with this home. You are welcome to get out, but your deposit will remain with the seller. Sorry, that's how that goes. And actually, funny enough, that same homeowner got another offer from another one of her agents and would not accept the offer from any agent in that brokerage. Is the seller allowed to do that?
Yeah.
Absolutely, they are.
I thought you meant as the broker.
So the broker, Remax, I don't know who that was. 8 agents in the office. The broker herself did pull out a contract. The buyer lost their $1,500, whatever. Sorry, that's how it goes. And another one of her agents submitted an offer on that same house. And the seller said, I don't want to work with any agent under that broker because the broker doesn't understand the contract. There's no way in hell the agents do. And they said, I'm sorry, the seller will not entertain any offers from any agent of that brokerage. And they're able to do that. Yeah. True story. Yes.
Now, from the buyer standpoint, is there a time frame within these repairs have to be made?
That's another beautiful thing. So if you're in an as-is contract, and let's say you have a 15-day inspection period, just to keep things the same, you have to not only ask for whatever you're asking for, right? Because we're just using this in a totally different way than it was intended, but you have to have everything signed on the dotted line by the end of that inspection period. I don't care if the realtor said, sure, we'll work it out. Let's say day 2, after the inspection period, nothing signed. It doesn't matter what they were told you. The only thing that is enforceable is if it's in writing. So the buyer and seller have to come to terms, write an addendum of whatever they're agreeing to in writing prior to the end of that inspection period. Not the case in the residential contract. In the residential contract, they give them time. So the seller shall have 10 days after the buyer's receipt of written notice of the report to basically get all these estimates in. And now they can determine how many repairs, what they'll be willing to do, how much, if they're going to negotiate. So all of those things will be done. And then the buyer has 5 days to agree or not agree with whatever the seller has proposed. Right? So once they've come to terms on what's going to be done, there's no time frame. It has to happen before closing per contract, right? So that's the beautiful thing of this contract. If you have a seller who has an old roof, why in the world would you use an as-is? Why in the world would you use an as-is? You know the inspector's going to come back and say, oh, limited roof life, because that's like one of their favorites, right? We know that.
Has reached the end of.
Has reached the end of service life. I love that one. Okay, but it still works. Who are they? How do they know that tomorrow it's not going to work anymore? It all has to do really with the material and the workmanship, right? You can have the same roof put on by 2 different people with different materials. One holds for 30 years, one holds for 10, right? All has to do with that. So it just means, yeah, it's getting old, but it works fine. Now, I would say in that instance, if I'm representing the buyer, and I'm going in on a home that has a very old roof, I probably would use an as-is, because I know with that residential, they're going to be held in with that roof, that roof life. Now, if the seller's on my side, we're going to be requiring that residential contract. So now we have to have a conversation with the buyer, say, listen, this is an older roof. You can try to ask for it, but the reality is they're not agreeing to it. This is a residential contract and it has nothing to do with roof life. So, but this is the point of you guys being educated and knowledgeable, understanding the nuances of the contract, right? So let me ask you, yes, Nadia.
Okay, so I have seen that some agents put
Uh-huh.
So
Jules.
in that case, you can basically find whatever like you want, deal or not, right?
Well, yes and no. So let me share with you the thing here. The problem is it is a tight inventory market. To Tammy's point. But to Tammy's point, it's really not a problem on the sell side. It's on the buy side, right? So you could put in an offer on a residential contract, but they said
That's
they only
really
want
where
as is,
I was going.
and you
with
might get it
something
kicked back, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, but for the seller, what does the seller care? Because it's a hot seller's market. So in this instance, the seller doesn't care, right? It's the buyers who might. But if I am the agent representing the buyer, I'm going to call the listing agent and say, we're going to be putting in an offer, but I have a question. Why was it that the seller did not want a residential contract? Now, I guarantee you that buyer's agent, that listing agent is not going to know, because they did not ask the seller if they wanted an as-is contract. They didn't ask. So if they say, oh, well, they want to sell it as is. So you say, are they not willing to do any repairs at all? Well, submit the offer and let's see. Guess what's happened here? The realtor's gone rogue and decided everything for that seller, which, by the way, is illegal, right? Because it's not our property. We don't get to make those choices. We are supposed to ask our sellers for direction on everything. So from us telling an agent, oh, sure, we'll negotiate. Really? Hello, confidentiality much? I mean, we have some issues here, right? So you've got to think about those things. But yes, to your point, it is difficult if they have written as is required. If you don't have that phone conversation first, if you send in a residential, it might probably not get accepted. You're right. And that stinks. And that's mostly because agents don't understand the difference between the two contracts. They see how long the residential contract is and they get panicked and they say, oh, forget it, I don't want it. The as-is is better. And attorneys love the as-is because they're simple.
Just one more page.
I think it might
Well, I
be
just
2,
think it's
but
more complicated on but I hear everything you're saying, but I can also hear a seller going, Well, now it does get into nuances of an inspection report and all of the details, and now you've got to nitpick over if they want to.
Well,
You know,
I see
and
what you're
just see
saying,
the
but
I mean, I hear you, but I love the simplicity of the as is. But knowing it and being careful and protected and explaining and telling the seller.
the simplicity of the as is for the realtor. It doesn't help the seller. Who are you working for, yourself or for the seller?
Well, I think the seller or the buyer, I'm trying to think through both sides.
Huh?
but-
In all actuality, the avenue is actually put you in a position to help you negotiate harder, right? Because this has so many protections in your, for your seller that, or even your buyer, like if you're in a residential and all of this is already spelled out, you don't have to negotiate it much because it's like, oh, well, I want
Right.
20,000 for this roof, and it's like, well, we're only gonna cover. 10.
Exactly.
So,
But you can still negotiate it in the as-is, but you do have to come back.
yeah.
Well, Nadia was saying that the as is you have to negotiate much harder. And you're right. The whole point of the contract is that everybody's agreed to all terms ahead.
Yeah.
Now, in the middle of a transaction, who knows what could happen? We all know that. And that's why there's contingencies and that's why there's outs. But the reality is we never did business. Let's go in and see what happens. And then we'll renegotiate the whole contract. That was not the professional way to do business. Hell, we didn't even have that contract, right?
And I've only ever been in real estate since we had.
And
so
that's the problem, Tammy. You're right. A lot of realtors have only been in real estate since 2008, and they only know the assets. And those of us who've been in there a long time, the veterans, were like, what the hell is this piece of paper? It's not even worth the paper it's printed on. Okay, I want to mention, so does anybody on the call or in the room feel with what we've just gone over, that I'm choking, that an as-is protects the seller more?
No.
So I, again, strongly recommend, because you're supposed to, that you offer the seller the opportunity to choose. But if you said to a seller, Jules, you can choose either the as-is contract or the residential. The as-is has an inspection period of 10 to 15 days. They can cancel for any reason. Or the residential contract, we decide ahead how much you would be willing to pay. If the inspection shows that there's a problem with working condition, up to $500 in general repairs, $500 in WDO, $500 in permits, it's your choice. We can already limit your exposure. Which would you prefer to use? Let me ask you, which seller would ever say as is? We had an attorney with Ashley Cunningham. She did a great job. She was representing the seller who was an attorney. The attorney says, I want an as is. She explained the difference. The attorney said, why the heck would I ever use an as is? And that was an attorney. So the thing is, guys, if you just understand the contract. Now, why would someone think as is might be better for a buyer? A way out. You can cancel for any reason. But also in this market, right?
And that's right, I think you can look through the buyer's side.
So we've got people saying, well, it's better to have the as is if you're representing the buyer because you have a way out. Well, let's say I'm representing the buyer. I'm going to use this contract, the residential. And this is the reason why. Right where we're here. Because I'm a stickler for filling in every line, right? Because the contract is only as good as it's filled in. The whole point of it is that everybody's agreed, right, to what's going to happen. So if you leave blanks, nobody knows, right? That's not a contract. But I would leave blanks here because most agents don't understand contracts, let's be honest. And if I leave this blank, seller shall pay the following amounts or percentages of the purchase price for the following costs and expenses. So if I leave this blank, it goes up to 1.5% of the purchase price for general repairs, for WDO, and for open permits. So let's just for fun say that the purchase price is $500,000, right? And let's say 1.5%. That's $7,500 for general repairs, $7,500 for WDO, and $7,500 for open permits. Now, does that mean that that would be $22,500 for general repairs?
No.
Anybody think you can? You can add it up and it could equal like a roof or something? No. I have seen people think that. You cannot add them together. It is the $7,500 only for general repairs, $7,500 only for the WDO, up to, right? And the $7,500 for open permits. So what would help your buyer better? Let's go in and hope we can renegotiate the contract and get what you need to get this house. Is that really helping them? Or going in and saying, well, don't worry, because we already have guaranteed $7,500 if something comes back bad on that general repair. They have to do it. Which one's better for your buyer? The residential. Who is the as is better for? The agent who thinks it's easier. That's it.
But
Yes, Emily. Sorry.
You can still renegotiate after that too, right?
I
I mean, say the seller's willing to.
Well, yeah, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
If the repair is up to 7,500, but it turns out it's 10,000. Yes, now we can have a conversation. Will the seller pay the whole thing? Will the buyer pay some of it? Will they split the difference? And if they can't come to terms, the buyer is still going to get their deposit back. So the buyer's money is not at risk here, guys. And that's what the agents think. They think that the buyer's money is at risk. It's not at risk. As long as those repair items that the inspector wrote must repair or replace comes in above the amount that's been written in here, you are now able to have a conversation and try to come to an agreement. And if you cannot come to that agreement, the buyer's money is not at risk. They get their deposit back. Absolutely. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So here's a question. Ready? In a as-is contract, let's go to as-is. Who is responsible to take care of open permits? Who's responsible to take care of it? Seller? Wrong. You are all going to be very surprised. In the residential contract, yes, we even have a number that's been negotiated that the seller will pay for. And the seller has to go down to the city and handle all the repair and all that. That's the seller's job because it's their home. As is, right? No. Who wrote these? The banks. Did they want to do that? No. So if you go to the as-is contract, and we go through open permits, which is my favorite section. Oh, I love this one. It's so fun.
You know, and I know that's true because I had someone have to do that.
Uh-huh.
With a buyer.
Let me pull it up. Hold on.
Really?
People don't realize these things. These are little minor things that can become a big, I think I passed open permits. I did. I passed it like a long time ago. Hold on. Let's go back. Open permits. Can someone help me? Where is open permits? Open permits. Financing. 185? 195. Miss Nadia, I love it. Yeah. No.
Go down a little bit.
Down?
Yeah.
It's permits. That's disclosures. Not under disclosure.
Yeah, I think it was like page 5 or 6.
268. Thank you. 268. Ah ha ha. Here we go. Seller assistance. Listen how this goes. I love this. The wording alone is funny. Seller assistance and cooperation in closeout of building permits. So if the buyer's inspection of the property identifies open or needed permits, that means that the Brazilian owner who hired the Brazilian builder to put in an outdoor kitchen and a fireplace and all these things and didn't pull one permit, you know, because that happens all the time. Looks beautiful, but can you sell it? No. Well, can you sell something if they're open permits?
Yes.
Yes, you can. If you're a buyer, should you buy something with open permits?
No.
No, because it could greatly affect the value of that property. Absolutely, because maybe not everybody feels so comfortable buying something with open permits. So let's go back. If the buyer's inspection of the property identifies open or needed permits, then the seller shall promptly deliver all plans, written documentation, or any information that they have in their possession or knowledge relating to those things that they would need open or needed permits, right? And they have to cooperate in good faith with the whose efforts? Buyer's efforts to obtain estimates of the repairs. The seller doesn't get the estimate repairs. The buyer has to get the estimates. But they just have to make sure that they can come in and out. And the seller must cooperate if they have to execute any authorizations or a consent for somebody to come in and do work. They have to authorize that. But it's for the buyer to conduct the inspections, have the estimates or the work prepared, and the seller, here's my favorite part, shall not be required to expend or become obligated to expend any money. You're buying the house as is, my friends. And if you're out of the inspection period, which people usually are by the time they run the open permits, and they come back and they're like, well, you have to take care of this. That's when you throw that as is contract back at them and you say, well, actually, no, we don't. You're buying this house as is. Yeah. Sneaky? Yeah. That's something I would like to do. Kind of slimy. But if I were representing a house and I put under realtor remarks that this had an outdoor kitchen that wasn't permanent, I would say sellers only requesting as is contracts.
Question.
Because I know that agents don't understand this. Yes.
So if there's a situation where somebody wants to buy the house, but can't buy the house, and they go into what's called like a lease option contract for 3 years.
Oh, God help us. Yep.
um,
He's asking about lease option. You want to buy the house, can't buy the house. They go into a lease option for 3 years.
Right. That's particularly done with like an as-is contract, right? Not a residential.
So I'm going to tell you right now, walk away.
Okay.
If you want to have a lease option, have an attorney write that up.
Okay.
We do not want to be held liable for what could happen over 3 years. By the way,
When you say
typically,
we, the broker or the seller?
either really, but really we get tied into liability there if we wrote that contract.
Well, what would be the incentive?
Some people like their neighborhood.
Credit, they don't have good credit.
They want to lock in a price. They work on their credit.
So in that case, that's exactly right. Home Path of America, yes. Home Partners of America. But I don't know if they're open and functioning again because COVID, they stopped working. So we'd have to check back. But Home Partners would be a great way to go there because they can decide if they want to purchase the home over the next 5 years. They have a contract that tells them the price over the next 5 years. And they've agreed to only rent it for 1 year, but they can also rent for up to 5 years. You get paid full cash closing and you're out. Liability is gone.
I have talked with Home Partners and they're back.
Oh, they're back. Woohoo. In every market or no?
It's specific. Yeah, you have to find out specifically.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear that the police are coming back. So yay. Okay. So now that we've seen this from a different perspective, does anybody see an opportunity where the as-is contract would be better for a buyer? Tammy, if you think so, you can say it. Tammy's like, I don't know. I still really like it myself. The point is, guys, the as-is contract is very vague because nobody's really ever buying a house as is, right? If we use it as it's intended, if your house is an investment home because it's a real blower upper, all day long you need to use an as-is contract. And if it were me and I were the listing side, I would say the seller is only accepting as-is contracts and is not willing to do any repairs at all. So, bring all offers or whatever. And then in that contract, I would counter it under additional terms and write, buyer and seller agree, buyer is purchasing this property as is and will not request or expect any differential in repairs or price. You know what? That's going to scare off a lot of people because it's going to scare the people where the realtors told them something completely different. Don't worry, we'll go in and then we'll ask for all this stuff. That's what they're telling them, guys. You know that. We all know that. So that's the importance of understanding the difference. Yes.
So when we are like, how do we, when we're dealing perhaps with
Mhm.
they don't have to do contracts and they get nervous for full. How in this market do you as competitive?
So Tammy's question is, in this market being so competitive, if the agent on the other side is requesting an as is, how do you come across as competitive? And again, you have to have a conversation and ask them, is there any reason that the seller didn't want to have a residential? And they may just say, well, not actually, we always just put that, and they
Yeah.
say, well, it would be okay if we put in a residential, it will actually lock in our customer that they have to have an inspection. They don't have a cancel for any reason clause. Yeah, sure, go ahead, right? That could be the conversation. You just don't know. Sometimes people just automatically have that phrase on their contracts. And so it always goes on there, right? It's already just a standard thing that they put in, whether they think about it or not, right?
One more question on if we choose to use the as-is, for whatever reason,
Mhm.
could we then go and say, for example, this item on the permits, put that as a condition?
Okay, good question. So Tammy's asking if we have to use the as-is for whatever reason, which a lot of times we do, can we add the part about the permits? You can. You can put under additional terms. Buyer and seller agree. Seller will provide, you can even say seller will do an inspection. You can make the seller have to do the inspection of permits and take care of closing or getting any open permits and paying for the cost. Absolutely. If you're going to write something like that, get to me. I would rather have Phil word us a really good addendum on that, because you have to be very careful when you're writing your own addenda, unless there's an addenda. If there was one in there for open permits,
From the regular one.
nah, you have to be really careful. I would just ask Phil for the best language, the most concise, because it has to be a full circle. If you have the holes in what you write, like for example, people write all the time at the end of these contracts, home must appraise. What does that mean?
It'll appraise, but appraise for what?
Exactly. It'll appraise, but for what? Right? It means nothing. So when that home comes back and it's 20,000 below appraisal, and they say, okay, well, we have appraisal contingency. My question is where? And they say, well, I wrote home must appraise. Well, it did appraise, right? You had an appraisal. Appraised to what? And even if it said home must appraise for the purchase price. Okay. And if it doesn't?
Right.
What happens? You didn't say that the buyer will be able to cancel the contract and get their money back. That's why there's addendum in there, because they talk about all those things. What happens if it doesn't? What, Nadia?
Do you know the permit limit? I see here that it just keeps referencing to the permit limit, but I don't see where.
The permit limit is whatever you've written on that line of how much you'd be willing to give up to.
Where?
On a residential contract, it's on the section of the 3 lines, which is line number, I'm in as is. Yeah, it's under, see right here, it's line number, I can't say, I got pictures. Got it, 140. So everybody clear on that. Also, here, this is huge. I couldn't even tell you how many more huge. There is, let's go over here. At the end, and this is funny, this came up actually recently and it made me chuckle. At the end of the contract, we have all the addenda, right? And they're the same in both contracts, except for something. This is a residential contract. You have K and L. K is as is, and L is right to inspect, cancel. Essentially, what those 2 addenda do is they turn the residential contract for the buyer into an as-is contract where they can get out and get their money back. So you're giving them a cancel for any reason clause, but you're holding your sellers to the higher standard of the residential contract. Do not, let's all say it together, do not ever accept either an as-is or a right to inspect / cancel addenda if you have a residential contract. You just negated the entire purpose for the seller to use it, right? Now, if you want to be a fancy little sly buyer's agent and slip that in there, well, good for you. Go right ahead. Right. But this is funny. So I had recently had an agent, I don't remember who or what the situation was, but they asked me, Carrie, what does K and L mean? Reserved. It just means this is an open space because this contract does not have the need for an as-is addenda or a right to inspect, right to cancel, because that is the contract. So these reserved just means that they're holding those spaces for the other contract. Yes, because if you look at both contracts, like I said, they are identical with the exception of the inspection. And part of the inspection is the open permits. Everything else, the financing contingency, 100% the same, right? Now, before you leave, Jules, I want to talk about one thing super important in the financing contingency. I know you got to run. And then we'll go back and kind of answer any questions. Today was a little bit more about the difference between the two. And this is about the same, right? The financing contingency. Let me get over to it. Here we are. Now, we understand, this is very important, and I've seen this happen more frequently than I'd like to tell you. It states very, very important here on line 103, upon buyer obtaining loan approval, buyer shall promptly deliver written notice to the seller. Are we always, when we have the buyer writing or putting in a text or an email that the buyer has been approved? Because if you're not, guess what can happen? The seller may have the opportunity, if the buyer fails to timely deliver notice to the seller before the expiration of the loan approval period, the loan approval shall be deemed waived. And this, now they're going on as if they were cash, number one. But the seller may elect to terminate this contract by delivering written notice to the buyer within 3 days from the loan approval. You had that happen. Well, it's horrible if you're representing the buyer and the buyer's good to go and you never told the listing agent and they had a backup offer and they choose to take it. Your buyers are gonna be mad. Now, did the buyers lose their money? They shouldn't have, because they're expected to close. So they don't have a financing contingency if they don't close, but they cannot lose their money, because the seller is electing to terminate the contract. So the seller has to assume they will close. They're just choosing to not close with them, right? That's the difference. But the problem here is that if the seller has a backup offer that's better, yeah, and the buyer's agent does not know enough to put in writing, text, email, whatever, doesn't matter. We are good to go. We have loan approval. The seller has the opportunity to get out for the next 3 days. So if the loan approval period ended on the 1st, they have the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th to deliver you a text, an email, whatever, with the release and cancellation showing that the buyer receives the money back, but that the contract's canceled. Let me tell you, if your buyer's already moved and all their stuff's in, somewhere else, and oh, it's ugly. I'm gonna probably get a call. And that's a sad thing, because it really is on the buyer's agent.
You remember? It was 30 days to a loan approval, and I sent the email to the buyer's agent, letting them know there was 30 days.
Yes.
And then it expired another 15 days, and then we kept the money. But I sent the email to them, listen, we are 30 days right now, nothing. They said nothing.
Right. So Jules is sharing that she sent the email to the buyer's agent. We're at 30 days, just letting you know, but that's not really our job. No, our job is to represent the seller. And if we have a backup offer, we might want to give that seller the option to take the backup offer. So we just hold our breath and don't say anything and see if we receive written notice of that loan approval. Because if we don't, that seller has every right to cancel. All right, so we're kind of going over. You're welcome. Thank you. Any questions as we tie up? Again, today was more about the differences between the two contracts. Anybody? Any thoughts? Anything you want to leave us with?
I already changed all my listings.
Jules has changed all her listings to residential. Woo!
Gary, I've got a question.
Sure.
Okay, so I love the last part we just talked about. But my question is, if you have a backup offer, I mean, again, you're going to have to go through this whole, even though you have a backup offer, you're still going to have to go through inspections, and all of that. Would you? And the seller is taking a risk if for any reason they decide to cancel this because they haven't received notice.
It depends on really what makes the backup offer better. Oftentimes, the backup offer is better because it's cash, right?
Right.
Quick close. And if you've already had an inspection and there was really nothing wrong, I would feel pretty confident that that inspection, yes, their inspection period will begin once their contract moves into first position. So you could even have a tighter inspection period. When you're accepting the backup offer, by the way, just to remind everybody, there's an actual addendum you must use. In order to be considered a backup offer, you must use an addenda that is a backup offer addenda. See number W, backup contract. I had an agent, she thought she had a backup because she put in an offer, they didn't accept it, and she told the agent on the other side, well, we want to be backup. The agent on the other side said, sure. And that was the end of that. And then she sees that it cancels and it goes under contract again. So she calls the other agent, she says, well, I thought we were backup. She said, I never received a backup addendum from you. Whose fault is that? That was our agent's fault. Yeah, I hate to say that. I know that agent. She didn't ask me about that. She's been in the industry a long time. Guys, you got to know what all these addendas are, and you got to use them.
And they're all in the interactive form.
They're all in dot loop under Florida interactive forms, every one of them. And you want to look at exactly how it's worded and type it in that way, because that'll pop up that way, right? That's how it pops up. But the important, and like, for example, if you're selling a property or buying a property and you're somehow related to that buyer or seller, you must use licensee property interest. You can't just put on the contract, I'm related to the seller, I'm related to the buyer, right? You have to disclose it properly, because remember, we are held to a higher standard. So if we're not even disclosing ourselves properly, that is a bad thing. That could even be code of ethics.
It doesn't go bad. It doesn't go beyond third cousin. Though.
No.
If your parents were
My
cousins-
mother's brother's cousin.
Yeah, like, I think that's- I think
No.
that's where it stops. Like, if your parents-
No, it's direct family.
Yeah, yeah. Like, yeah. So
Mhm. That's so funny.
Georgia is funny.
But Emily?
What if you have a buyer who is representing his brother-in-law? Do they need to give you the addendum, or is that just on us?
No. So the buyer is the buyer's agent. So she said if the buyer is representing their brother, yeah, you still need a licensee personal interest. Absolutely. Whoever on whatever side is supposed to produce that. So if you're on it, you need to produce a licensee personal interest. If someone else is on it, they need to produce that. If they don't know to do that, then you help them out, you fill it out, and you send it to them to sign. But it needs to be disclosed to everybody. Yep, licensee property interest. Okay, and listen, post and pre-closing occupancy, there's a reason there's addendums here, guys. This can get very complicated and a lot of liability. By the way, I hate all post and pre-occupancy. I hate them. They're a mess. But if you ever need to do one, call me first, and we will use these addenda, because it is imperative that they have it. If you're on the sell side and someone's doing a pre-closing occupancy, you know what kind of liability you just opened your seller up for? Because they could end up getting a tenant who stops paying and now has to evict. And they thought they had a buyer. So, and the post-closing, that's the other thing. If you're the sell side, you're fine. But if you're on the buy side, they might think they're getting a home, and then suddenly they bought an investment, right? Because they can't keep up the sellers. So that could get sticky. And by the way, there needs to be a lease written up between them.
Yeah.
There needs to be a lease written between them. And that is what evict.com is for. They're great, $50. So that's a good one. But don't do it yourself, because everything that you do, you are now liable for. The state of Florida, we do so much more than any other area. New York, you show a property and you hand it over to the attorney. The attorneys write the contract. The attorneys do the inspection. The attorneys do everything. And the realtor shows up and gets the check. I mean, really, it's kind of disgusting. In the state of Florida, we run around like lunatics with our head cut off, right? And if we say something, and there's so many lawyers, but they still don't do it. They don't make half the money either. But the problem is, if we say something like about taxes or about FERPTA or about something that we know a little bit about, you're now liable for that information. So don't talk about something unless it's in our realm, and always refer to a FERPTA specialist, an accountant, or whoever might be a specialist in that area. Take that liability off of you. Another one that,
Did you answer the question in the chat? What would you not do an as is for FHA?
well, for FHA again, let me see. Oh, I didn't. Let me go back here to chat. So again, it's going to really depend on the seller. So if the seller is requesting the as is, it's not going to matter, because you have the FHA VA addendum. Make sure you use the correct one, which is the FAR bar, not the crisp one. And that addendum, every addendum supersedes the contract. So that addendum has the contingency for appraisal. That addendum has different information about repair cost. That is in addition to whatever you agree in the as-is contract. So here's a question, just to throw it out. With a VA contract, right? You have a seller, a buyer's putting in a VA offer, and the buyer says the seller has to pay for the WDO. Is that true?
Not in Florida anymore. I said that last time.
Emily heard me last time. Did anybody online? Did you guys hear Emily? The reality is there are 9 states that the VA administration does not require that the seller pay for the WDO. And crazy enough, Florida is one of the 9. However, what happens is that a lot of times these lenders like USAA, Navy Federal, they're these big national lenders. So they have their own overlays. So they can make that a requirement, right? So that's why you need to have that conversation. If you are representing a seller who is a VA, who's accepting VA offers, you have to say, we may have a situation where they're requiring you to pay for the WDO. In that instance, use Mike McFadden, recommend him because Mike McFadden will do free WDO for military personnel. At least he used to, so just double check. It's Hero Inspection. Mm-hmm.
So can we still use the residential with the
Absolutely, I would rather use the residential. But again, remember, it depends on what side you're on.
with the buyer?
With the seller. If you're representing the buyer, you have a VA buyer, that seller may require, they may be saying accepting as is or only accepting residential. So whatever you're going to put the offer in, it doesn't matter. The VA will accept either contract, but everything that they need, all the language that they need will be in their addendum, which will supersede that. Okay, excellent. Any other questions? Everybody good? I hope everyone learned something today. Love the residential. All right, guys. Well, it was great seeing you all. And I will look forward to seeing you for our sales meeting on Thursday at 10 a.m. Bye. It's going to be in Lake Nona if anyone wants to come. Have a great day.